little monsters, this little monster girl Desi coming at ya. And today I have another cross this and that video for you guys. Today I'll be crossing over Eddsworld with Disney's The Gargoyles. This was actually a concept that I wanted to try some time ago, but it ended up getting outvoted for Has-Been Hotel originally. Sadly, those designs that I was originally working on, well, some life stress ended up getting in the way and I lost passion for the project. I did manage to finish 2 designs, which are up on my Patreon if you guys want to check them out. And I do plan on redoing that video at a later date. So before I start today, I just want to let you guys know that this will be one of my first videos where I'll end up having to chop it up into multiple parts. And this is because the recording for these designs took so much longer than even my first Has-Been Hotel designs, which I find very interesting. For those of you who use Ibis probably know that the drawing app allows you to either record freehand or to play back the footage later, which is what I've used for many of my videos, but as I've come to know, it doesn't show all the details, which makes it a little bit hard to follow along. So I'm trying to do more live feed recordings. That way it's a bit easier to follow along, but as a result it does take a lot longer. And sadly my little tablet doesn't have the capacity to be able to render an entire video like that. So this video will contain both the sketch image of the full group as well as the full designs of the first 2 that I'll be drawing. And while it's not recorded, I did end up going back to redo these designs a little bit at the end. So I'll be showing a before and after image of the designs that you'll see on screen and the finished designs later. This is because the video would have ended up being way too long, and trying to crunch it down to be under 30 minutes, at least for the footage wise anyways, would have ended up making the video way too long. But you'll be able to see a similar process with the next video, so don't worry. Now to start off with, to give a bit of context of what Disney's The Gargoyles is, the show takes place in, at first, the medieval times, where gargoyles and magic used to exist. The whole concept of gargoyles is that they protect people. They'll stay in high areas and protect the people that live within the area as sort of a symbiotic relationship with the humans that they protect. Since gargoyles turn to stone during the day, it makes them completely vulnerable. So as a result, it's expected that the humans protect them during the day while they protect the humans at night. Sadly, at the beginning of the story, these gargoyles end up being betrayed and even treated as monsters beforehand. After being put on a magic spell, they end up slumbering for over 1,000 years before they're taken to New York, where the spell is eventually broken. The main antagonist of the story, at least for the first while, is a man named Xanatos, an extremely wealthy man who brought the gargoyles to New York in the first place. And one of the main human protagonists of the story is Elisa Maza, a detective who ends up investigating Xanatos and even finding out about the gargoyles. And she much later ends up befriending them, at least story-wise to the first few episodes. And from then on, she ends up being their main source of protection and a good friend. The leader of the gargoyles is Goliath, one of the few gargoyles who end up having a name at the very beginning of the story, but this is something that changes later on. This is because, due to gargoyle tradition, they don't have names. This isn't because they can't communicate or that they are actually monsters. It's just the way they've always been. They all look so drastically different to each other, they haven't found a use for names. There is also a lot more to the story, but If you want deeper context, you can watch it on Disney Plus or on some other platform, I'm not sure. Either way, it's always been a really good TV show and I definitely suggest it. However, for this AU, I'll actually be focusing on some minor background characters that have showed up in Eddsworld. And if you've read the title of this video, you'll know that I'll be starting with Yu and Yanov, the two main characters of this AU. To give a bit of context on my version of Yu, if you don't follow me on Tumblr or other places that I've posted my headcanons in the past few years, originally I've always seen Yu as a bit of a wild card. He's very unassuming and a bit unhinged, which is one of my favorite versions of him. I like this version because it also contrasts Yanov, who I headcanon to be more level-headed and stoic, but still somebody who's very caring, especially since he's an army medic. There were definitely a lot of different choices when it came to choosing characters that would be the main characters of this AU, but I decided to go with some minor background characters that I don't use a lot, since I thought it would be a lot more fun. And in particular, since this AU will be taking place in New York City, I've decided to use Eddsworld USA, the AU, as a reference. I've always really liked those designs, and I thought it would definitely be a good spin-off. Or not spin-off, but a good twist to the story. That said, I don't know what kind of Americanized names I would use for the characters, so to make it easier on myself and everybody else listening, I'll just refer to them by their canon names. I always headcanon Yu as being half Asian and half European of some kind. Sort of an extra excuse to give him a baby face. Most of the time I see him as headcanoned as half Japanese and half Finnish, which is something I follow along with pretty well, as far as I can remember at least. And for this AU, I've decided to make him Italian-American and half Filipino. This is so that he still has a pretty bad case of the baby face, and causes a lot of people in his department to tease him a bit. Not exactly bully him, but definitely tease him about being a rookie, even though he's been on the job for quite a few years. In the original story, Elisa Maza has been a cop for a while, before she became a detective, so she's pretty well known in her department. And I think she fits the Yu's personality pretty well. And while I know that a lot of people, including myself, have canoned Yu to be mentally unstable of some kind, he's a different kind of unstable in this AU. He's a lot more reckless rather than, like, having something wrong in his head that makes him dangerous. And he's actually a pretty good detective. He's just, again, kind of reckless and while he tries not to drag other people down with him, he has a bad habit of getting into a bit of trouble. Problem is, he's also a very good detective, he's very good at getting things done, and he's very good with the people. So they can't very well fire him, at least as far as I know about police departments, which isn't a lot. But that's kind of the vibe that Elisa Maza in the cartoon kind of gave, so I'm sticking with that. I can imagine Yu that while he didn't grow up in poverty, his family wasn't completely well off. And that caused him to be a bit suspicious of rich people, considering he's worked a few jobs before the police department that has shown that a lot of people do not really respect others who are in civil duties or, in many cases, retail or customer service. So he's especially not very trusting of the words of a billionaire who decides to build a giant castle on top of a giant skyscraper. But more on that in the next video, since it's not completely relevant in the same way. Design-wise, I've always thought that Yu looks either really good in blue or really good in orange. So I decided to give him the full denim look. The jeans, the jacket, the whole look, which I think suits him pretty well considering the time period that this takes place in. Which is, by the way, the 90s if you couldn't guess. Rather than having straight blonde hair, I decided to give him more of a dirty blonde look, and that his hair just kind of ends up bleaching itself inside the summer sun. So his roots are still brown, but he's still also blonde. I also made sure to give him freckles because those look really good on pretty much everyone, and I thought it would be a cute touch to go along with the fact that he's out in the sun so much that his hair ends up getting bleached. Personality-wise, he doesn't differ drastically to my common headcanon of him. That he's very fun-loving outside of work, but during work he's very serious about it. And this is also something that stems from both his home life and the fact that he served for a few years when he was younger before he ended up entering the department. So despite being one of the shortest people in his department and definitely looking the youngest, he can hold his own. He is very scrappy, and he's also very clever. I can also imagine that while he is genuinely mistrusting of anybody who works for the billionaire, he does give them a benefit of the doubt if they seem genuine in what they're talking about, which is where Yanov comes in. In the cartoon, they actually build up very well to how the Gargoyles meet Eliza Maza. While it doesn't happen completely naturally, and it does warrant some prompting from a third party, which it's going up against the billionaire, it does set up a good reason for the Gargoyles to go down to surface level from the huge skyscraper, and in which Goliath ends up meeting Eliza Maza. At first, they're pretty mistrusting of each other, but they learn to believe in one another. Though their relationship still ends up being rocky for a bit, considering the whole cultural barrier. The Gargoyles are from 1,000 years ago, Eliza Maza is a modern woman. There are issues that separate them, but they start to learn about each other. Which is something I really want to apply to both Yu and Yanov. While Goliath was appointed leader of the Gargoyles because the old leader became too old, in Yanov's case, that isn't exactly what happened. He was never appointed leader, he just ended up being the only oldest one still around after their clan was destroyed. But even with that in mind, I can imagine that Yanov is very protective of the younger Gargoyles. He feels like he has to be the adult of the situation to make sure that they stay out of trouble, especially now that they're in a new world. I can imagine that unlike Goliath, he is extremely mistrusting of pretty much all humans until Yu. After all, his whole clan was burned by them before, and there are so few of them left, he has to do what he can to protect them. While also feeling the need to, well, earn the whole title of being leader of the clan. After all, since he wasn't officially appointed, that means he technically doesn't have any authority, but instead only takes authority because he's the oldest and the biggest. As a result, Yanov doesn't want to trust Yu when he tells him that the millionaire is a bad guy, but he already doesn't even trust the millionaire. So a lot of the conversation ends up being one-sided, with him just being very grumpy and growly. But he also quickly realizes that he needs more friends from this time if his clan is to survive in this new world. So for now, he decides to at least give this particular human a chance if the millionaire turns out to be a liar. And on Yu's side, he ends up having to be very patient with him because he doesn't want the gargoyles to be an intentional collateral damage if something goes wrong. Because while they may be monsters, he can tell just by looking at them that they're in a new world and they're very scared. They have no idea what's going on, and it's literally 1,000 years from the time that they were used to. So they don't know the social laws, and they definitely don't know anything about current laws either. And as a policeman, and also somebody who comes from a family of immigrants, he probably has heard a lot of stories about being in a new place with new rules. So he tries to understand that the gargoyles need time to think this over. And once the gargoyles finally leave the castle that's on top of the skyscraper, which has to do with the whole curse thing, but I won't get too much into that because, again, it's for another character video. Yu and Yanov try to work together to keep the younger gargoyles safe now that they're both responsible for them. Though Yanov is still a little bit reluctant to share that responsibility with a human he just met, but he also knows that he has no choice. And from there, a deeper friendship between Yu and Yanov in particular ends up growing, which ends up evolving into something more, but for a while they both keep that secret from each other because they feel like it's something that just can't happen with the fact that one's a human and the other's a gargoyle. And even if they were a male and female, it would still mean that anything that could become of it probably wouldn't. They just end up accepting that they live in very different worlds for a long time. Which I personally like in stories like these, because as much as I like quick romance, I also like the type of romance that slowly builds up on each other. Especially one where it's very clear that humans are not used to monsters, and the monsters are either scared or hate humans. So it would make sense that there is a barrier between them, even if there's not actually one in secret. But enough on that, I'll get on to Yanov's outfit design and his gargoyle form. Outfit-wise, I definitely noticed that the early 90s definitely had a theme for a lot of superhero costumes, a lot of which are very obvious with the very skin-tight ones. While Gargoyles' big theme was that a lot of the gargoyles just don't wear pants for some reason. Which I guess kind of makes sense. I guess with the way that their legs are shaped, it would be kind of hard to, create pants that would bend correctly. But at the beginning of the story, the gargoyles would not be wearing this 1,000 years ago, and the clothes end up being more modern for Yanov, I mean. He ends up with a leather jacket and a big belt. At first I tried to give him jacket sleeves, but I decided later on to leave his arms bare and to add some cuffs around his wrist, like the ones around his ankles. Those of which are carried over from when he was still from when before they were turned to stone for 1,000 years. I can imagine that the millionaire decided to give them new clothes to try and help them adjust to the new times. And while they got rid of the loincloths that they wore, which I'm not going to draw because I do not like how they look. I just really don't like loincloths for some reason. I don't even like them on Tarzan. But they all end up keeping those metal arm and leg guards, which I think goes really well with the look, to be honest. For Yanov, I definitely like him in darker colors. A lot of people either put him in gray or straight black, which looks pretty good. But I decided that instead of making him black or gray, I decided to give him more of a purple hue to make it so he complemented you a bit more. And also to play off the original leader of the Gargoyles, Goliath, who is a bit of a purplish blue. I also decided to give him lighter color hair instead of giving him black hair. And also, since the Gargoyle's eyes glow, instead of giving him like actual colored eyes, I decided that he would have light yellow eyes that almost blend in with his scleras. Coloring Yanov was actually a lot of fun, even if I had to do it twice. I think the second version turned out a lot better, especially with the colors that I gave him. I tried to give him a rocky texture at first, giving him a striped texture like, I think sandstone is what it is. But then I decided to give him more of a gravelly looking shading and coloring to make it look like regular stone instead of like rock that's just straight out of the ground. Like, definitely not anything refined like marble, but definitely looking good. Though, in my opinion, if you want to give your gargoyles a more refined or porcelain look, it definitely fits with the whole theme of gargoyles being protectors. And if you've ever seen I, Frankenstein, the gargoyles take on more of an angel appearance too. Even though the speed paint took quite a while to get through and to finish both recording and editing, I am so glad that I stuck with it. I still really love the designs of you and Yanov, and I can't wait to get started on the rest of them. And I really hope to be able to explain more of the story soon too. So with all that said, let's look at the results. Out of all the background characters I've seen during my time in the Eddsworld fandom, I can still say that you and Yanov are some of my most favorites. Partially because they're two of the first that I came into contact with when joining the fandom. What I love about background characters is that even though that they are in canon and do play very small parts, it's fun to see how different people interpret their pretty much blank slate personalities. When you have a character that is pretty much just a design and some mannerisms that you've seen on screen, there's a lot to fill in personality-wise and background-wise, which a lot of people have fun with. No matter what dynamic I've seen, you and Yanov have definitely been my oldest favorites, aside from Anya, but that's a completely different story. I love how in some iterations, you is the chaotic one, while Yanov is the voice of reason. In other cases, they're both relatively sane people, they just have the dynamic of being the soft-looking one and the scary-looking one, while having to watch their boss be an absolute dickhead. There was even one AU that I saw where Yanov ended up turning his back on the Red Army, and even going up against it, and you had to be the one to take him down. There's a lot of different iterations that you can go with. And I can definitely say that I am happy with the choices that I've made for this AU. Even though I had a lot of options with the main cast particularly, I thought going with the background characters would blend a lot better to this. And I really hope that all of you who were watching and stayed until the end had a lot of fun. And I definitely hope that the next videos will have just as good quality. So I think it's now time for the end card. As always, I would like to thank my patrons on Patreon, Olivia Estridge and Elliot Bunny. You guys rock as always, and thank you so much for your continued support. I'd also like to thank everybody who's commissioned me in the past 2 months. Your support has definitely been a lot of help too, and I'm always happy to receive commissions or be told that my art has either inspired people or that they just enjoy the way my characters look and their stories. Making interesting stories and interesting characters has always been a big motivation for me. So I hope you'll all continue your support with future projects. And like always, I have all of my social medias down in the description below. Like I said, your support means a whole lot, and receiving comments on my videos, my comics, or my stories always lets me know that there are people who appreciate what I do. So, with all that said, watch out for the monsters under the bed, and I'll see all you jelly beans in the next video. Bye!